Now, tips for parenting toddlers during the lockdown. Our guest is the parenting coach, author, and mum of two, Sharlene Poole, whose latest book is called Toddler Whispering, a follow-up to her best-selling Baby Whispering. Everything from sleeping, eating, toilet training, screen time, and much more. Charlene's in lockdown at home with her husband, toddler, and 9-month-old baby in Raglan. Good morning, Charlene.
Good morning.
So how's the lockdown setup going for you with youngies?
Well, I feel very blessed to have a garden and, quite a good community to be able to walk around in terms of the streets and so forth.
It's a real situation for people at the moment with young children trying to work from home, and everyone's making their own way of it, but it provides some unique challenges, doesn't it? Because 2-year-olds, and they're not up for, they're not up for pop back and see mum or dad in half an hour, are they?
No, but it's funny because I just think this is a wonderful opportunity for parents to have some quality time, even though there's challenges, particularly for those children who are used to the extra stimulation of preschools and daycares and so forth. There is a lot you can do at home, and I do feel for people in an apartment where there isn't much space, but this age group, I kind of feel, is probably slightly easier than the primary school age group in terms of being able to stimulate them more easily at home.
Very good point. What are some of the ways you do that? Are they more quickly responsive to the distractions or the actions than an older child?
Exactly, and they thrive on repetition. So, the whole idea of a preschool and daycare, I used to run one many years ago, is the repetition and having the same routine every day. The music time is at a set time, having creative time around meal times, morning tea times, those simple routines on repeat, they actually love and thrive in, as long as you add in a little bit of diversity in there. But things like, I've converted half of my office space into a playroom for the children and taken away things off the desk that I don't need at the moment, and have created a hut underneath the desk. And George, who's 2.5, is loving that, but equally his sister is loving it at 9 months old as well. So there's lots of little things that you can do within the house, but also, of course, if you've got garden space, we've been making the most of this time planting seeds, and George just loves using the watering can and getting in the dirt and digging and simple, outdoor pleasures like that.
Really wise to set up if you are working. We'll move on to other things in a moment, but if you are working, I've seen some wonderful things. I've seen people who've put some really good email replies or contact replies along the lines of, that the idea that we've all got some extra staff on hand at the moment, and some of the 2-year-old is particularly prone to office drama. So just a way of making everyone appreciate that this is the environment and we're all part of it and we're all in it together. But I love your idea that if you have a space where they can be near you, but you get rid of some of the things that they can pull down or rip or damage. Or,
yes. Yeah.
And so they can
it's something I've encouraged. I've encouraged even before this lockdown with families with this age group, toddlers and preschoolers, is they like to play near you most of the time. They love their independent play, but they really love being near you because then they can get your reactions and encouragement. So I've often gone into people's homes and said, what are you using this space for? It might be a little seating area or coffee room or something. And I'll say, do you really need those shelves with magazines or photo albums on them at the moment? Do you think you could display some of their music toys or books or some of their activities and utilise that space for this particular age? And of course, in lockdown, that would be even more vital.
Something else to consider is how they pick up on stress, and there's a lot of it out there right now, and we're asking a lot of parents I know who are feeling in many instances the most acute stress about their financial or their business or their job situation. You've got to somehow have a switch, don't you, that keeps that to you and to grown-ups and somehow protects the toddler. What are your techniques?
Oh, I mean, it's so hard. And my son, particularly, he's very sensitive. He's very emotional, very teary, and he picks up on a lot. And I think, there's an element that it's good for them to sort of realize that you're feeling an emotion, but it's about switching off and distracting. And I think when you've set up particular activities with children that bring joy, it's a really good distraction to bring you out of how you're feeling. So, water play, bubbles, doing stuff that creates laughter with your child or your baby is going to be the best way to divert the stresses of what's going on. But I also believe in that routine. I mean, I've always been a huge believer in routine, and particularly now, because when you're busy as a parent, and I single parented George and then have running my own business, writing the book, having that routine is the best coping mechanism when you're dealing with stress in your head, because you're distracted by your child's routine that is essential.
It's a really important point you make, actually, that embracing that engagement with your children and just parking stuff in the moment and going with them where they're going is actually going to help
Yes,
with the mental and emotional balance that you
it
need
does.
in these
And
times.
yeah, and that's why I feel the structure and the routine is really important, not only for them, but for you, because it keeps you on track. If you wander off in your mind or your emotion, you might have listened to something on the radio or somebody sent you a message that concerns you, but actually at that moment coming up is their you had planned to do an activity, or it was their sleep time or their bath time. You're distracted because you sort of keep your path for the children as the most important at that time of day.
Which it is at any time of day, and that again is
Busy.
in the most extreme of circumstances, or even if you're not in that, it's just a good perspective reminder about what ultimately does matter, what does matter most in life.
Yes.
Simple thing to say,
Yes.
I know. Let's talk about toddler behaviour and behavioural change that you're trying to achieve or that you're trying to learn. Is this the time to be doing it? Is the time to be doing it just whenever it's necessary? Could you comment?
I think keeping up the same boundaries that you had started to establish, or that you'd established before this lockdown, is important, but we also must be mindful that I always talk about an 80-20 sort of balance. There has to be a little bit more flexibility at that time. So when you realise, I always say when children have tantrums or having something to do with a behaviour issue, is sort of think about what time of day these are happening, why they might be happening, and is there something that you can tweak or change in your running of the day or routine that could lessen the amount of them. But in terms of the reaction to their behaviour, I don't think that you really need to change that at this time. It just might be that sometimes you use diversion rather than timeout or quiet time as such.
Let's look at some of the specific matters that you cover in the book and in your advice. What are some of the things that you really are trying to establish or re-establish at this age?
Well, the book's kind of divided into two, really. It's divided into the toddlers, sort of under 2.5s, and then the preschoolers, that older age group. And I designed it just like my first book in terms of, as a advisor, is what I get asked most frequently. And the most frequent thing in both of the age groups is creating boundaries and what is okay in terms of do's and don'ts, and how you're dealing with tantrums, of course, is a big one for this age group. And then screen time is sort of a more modern thing that's come about. And so I sort of talk about screen time and common questions that get asked for each of the age groups.
Let's talk about the tantrums, so
Yeah.
associated with the terrible twos. What's
Yeah.
going on with them and what's your
It's
best
it's
response to them?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people say to me when I do a consult, "Oh, I didn't actually experience the terrible twos, I experienced the challenging threes. So it is a personality thing, I think. The 2-year-olds, definitely you see them starting to happen, but they can carry on these tantrums subject to the child's personality and how we're dealing with them right through into sort of 2s, 3s, and 4s. I have a phrase that I say is listen, acknowledge, and respond. So listen to what they're having the tantrum about, acknowledge that they are frustrated or upset or annoyed, and then respond. And responding is choosing a way that you're going to deal with that behaviour in terms of that tantrum. I have always been a believer in using a quiet chair or quiet spot that is in the same room, particularly with the younger children. And I've actually started using it with George, my son, and when he's doing something and I've given him sort of a verbal chance to think about his behaviour and he won't listen, then he will sit on this chair, but he's in the same room, he's not sent away, which can sometimes be very detrimental for a toddler age group, is sort of seen as a bit of rejection.
What is going on with them? They are in full-on red rag phase, aren't they? There's not much thinking going on in there in a tantrum, and you almost have to wait out for that moment where you can relate again.
Yeah, a lot of it starts in the beginning, particularly in the old age group, with the frustration of their communication skills. You know, they can't communicate what they're feeling. They can't communicate and express what is frustrating them. And often, if we're rushing them or we're not actually respecting this personality or the stage of their development, it frustrates them so much that it results in a meltdown, a major meltdown. So as their communication skills improve, that's when the tantrums, generally speaking, will start to dissipate. So it's incredibly frustrating for them not being able to communicate why they're annoyed. Also developmentally, you know, they think that they can climb that mountain, but we know as a parent that that is unachievable, and we have to somehow make that known to them that that is not achievable, right, which of course is very frustrating for them. And that's where those consistent sort of repetitive boundaries are really important.
We're hemming them in just right when they're trying to bust out. Well, there's some other factors too. Let's talk about sleeping and eating, because this can be a factor as well, just simply getting overtired. And let's talk about sleep changes in this age group and how you manage them.
Well, it's again divided into two. So you're going to go from babies when they are 1. At the beginning of this book, I talk about moving from 2 sleeps a day to 1 sleep a day, and then from 1 sleep a day to no sleeps. And I've always talked about transition phases and not being absolute. So it's a little bit different at the moment with lockdown because they're not going to be getting their usual external activities. So they may have to have their routine altered. But when they're going through changes and parents contact me, they say either their children are waking up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 5 o'clock in the morning, then I will discuss with them what their weekly routine is, how many activities they have, so you're not going to cut back on sleep too prematurely that they then will get overtired. So it's about weaning them off the amount of sleep by reduction rather than just stopping. And then equally, when they go from 2 sleeps down to 1 or 1 sleep to no sleep, I've always been a big believer in creating quiet time. And this lockdown period is actually a really good time to start this, is creating a time where they just are a bit more still and a bit more quiet. And you might use something like audio books or put some quiet music on, some meditative music, and create a quiet space for them in their house somewhere, might be in the hut that you've created, and start with maybe just 5 minutes quiet time, and then encourage that time to sort of increase up to 30 minutes. And those are sort of the transition phases of moving out of sleep, but they still need that downtime so they don't get overtired and a bit crazy at the end of the day.
One sleep question from a listener. How do we deal with daylight savings and the impact on sleep? Please help.
The basic guide has always been that the week before the change, the clocks change, you tweak your daily routine by about 10 to 15 minutes, sort of 15 minutes. So you just slowly shift that bedtime to heading towards the new time. And if you do it gently and gradually over the week, it doesn't have the same sort of shock impact. It really also depends on how many sleeps a day your child's having, or if they're having no sleep, it's a little bit easier. But yeah, that's the sort of the general rule of thumb, is the week before, start tweaking your current routine and pushing out that bedtime by 15 minutes.
Let's talk about eating, and again how those routines change at this stage of life, at the toddler stage.
Eating. When I do my seminars, the biggest thing I talk about is patience and distraction, because most children that have problems with eating, it comes about because they may be teething. So it might start when they're teething and their taste buds change. They don't feel like that food that they used to love anymore, and then because of their reaction to that, we become a little bit fearful and we might change what we're offering them. So it's really about being creative in terms of enhancing flavors in their food, making it visually appealing, but also making sure that the time of day when you're offering it is not too late. And this is, again, a really positive thing about this lockdown, is that there is not going to be the families that pick up their children from daycare or preschool and have to sit in traffic to get home, and dinner's running quite late because of those things they can't avoid. So having an early dinner time that is going to capture the children before they get fidgety and less patient with their eating is a great one. Something I've had to do with my son. He's an incredibly slow eater, and this started really early on, and most parents would not have stuck it out, I know, like I did. But I'd be sitting at the table with him for 45 minutes to an hour, and even sometimes now, because he just chews and thinks, and I had to read 9 books sometimes to be able to get through his meal. And if you don't apply that patience and respect to their age and their personality, then they can learn not to eat that well, because we're rushing them. And that's something that's really key in this toddler age group, is not being pressured and rushed.
Well, speaking of which, it's an ideal time possibly to work on the toilet training.
It is. Well, funny enough, that's something that I'm planning to do, because you don't have to go in and out and confuse them by putting a nappy on and not putting a nappy on. So when you've got a child that's showing signs of being ready, like, that's one thing I'll say, is don't, just because we're in lockdown, do assess to see if your child is ready. Don't push them into it just because it's a perfect time for it. Make sure they are ready. And I talk about in my book those signs of what, that they show you that they're ready. My son is ready, and he showed those signs at the end of summer, but with being busy with a baby and work, I kind of went, I'm just going to wait till he really is ready. And so now I know I've got this opportunity. He knows what to do, it's just he can't be bothered, so I'm going to sort of step it up a little bit.
And what does it involve? Because again, you don't want to give them a fixation around it. Same with eating. It's something that requires patience, while someone makes a really big change, actually, and quite an exposing change, isn't it? It's a big moment.
It is a big moment. I think being mindful about where they want to do it. So some children have a fear about doing it in a bathroom or a toilet. And I know when George showed me his first sign, he wanted to have the potty sitting on the deck. And that was absolutely fine with me, to move it around and make it a bit more creative and a bit more inviting, because he didn't really want to go into that dark or quiet space. But just be mindful of not using the words, oh no, that's a shame, and making them feel like they're failure. Just go, oh dear, that's an accident. We'll try next time, and do that maybe for up to sort of 3 days, where you might have lots and lots of underpants, if you've got them on supply, of course, at the moment. And be prepared that you're going to have a lot of washing and they are going to wet themselves, and but try not to make them feel disheartened by it. And then after 3 days, maybe reassess if you're not making any progress, if it's actually going backwards, if they're getting a little bit sneaky and going and hiding so that, they don't have to go on the potty or the toilet, then maybe it's time to stop and try again later.
Now, screen time, particularly challenging at the moment because everybody's trying to occupy their time and get through all this. So I suppose it's exceptional right now. But in general, what are your thoughts about screen time, especially in this quite young age group?
I'm not a huge fan of it. I've always sort of thought the least amount is better, the least as possible. But there are many families that need it. They express to me that they find it very helpful, particularly when they have a new baby in the house or if they're working and they need to use it. So it's about being careful about how many times a day and the time of day you use it, particularly for the younger age group. I've been into some families where they're having maybe about an hour at the end of the day, and some of the content that they're watching for that particular child who's particularly sensitive can actually then have issues later, maybe with nightmares or dreaming. So I feel that it's okay to use if you use it sensibly with boundaries within your routine. Maybe pick one time a day that you would find it most helpful for them to sort of just be still and just monitor the content of what they're watching.
Just finally, one more question, and we started out there, but we might finish there again. This is a solo mum asking, has a 2-year-old toddler, has to work from home, just asking for some tips. We touched on that with that play area, the little kind of fort area near you, and just clearing a space when they can be near you, because that's going to be the main driver, isn't it? Just they like being in your bubble all the time, not just in lockdown.
Yeah. One little tip is, if you know you've got some work that needs to be done, be a bit creative. So maybe while they're having their midday sleep, maybe at night when they go to bed, create a surprise for them to wake up to, a new activity, something that you've set up at nighttime. So when they wake up, they're like, wow, that's a surprise. So it's a really good distraction, and it might occupy them for about half an hour while you need to get something really important done. And choosing a space, if you don't want to be interrupted or can't be interrupted, choosing a space that's not a bit of a tease to a child, like choosing the kitchen table probably isn't the best place. It might be in the bedroom where you can shut the door and actually explain that's a workspace today.
Thank you so much, Sharlene. Really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
The latest book is Toddler Whispering by Sharlene Poole. As with so many of the books we're covering at the moment, you may not be able to go out and buy them in the lockdown situation, but you can certainly put them on your long list. Your bookseller is going to greatly appreciate your business when you are able to come back, and more than that, you're going to have some great reading. Her previous book was Baby Whispering.